Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
How's everybody doing? Good to see you all.
So glad this is a first time experience for me.
I know I'm honored to be on a panel of such
Yeah,
great men and women of
all the
Likewise.
brain,
God. I'm just like,
all the
yo,
brain power,
what did I do to deserve
the
this?
screens.
They're just
All the
photoshopping me in. That's
brainiacs.
all.
Yeah, all this brain power. Look at the size of our heads.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
God. Now I'm going to sit back now. Let me move my laptop up because, that's my soft spot.
That's that's
So
that's
wrong.
testament to the amount of cranial matter we contain. Praise the Lord. Got a bunch of Pauls and Deborahs on here today.
Oh
Mm.
Lord.
Yeah, I'm trying to tell you. Trying to tell you something. This is good stuff. So who's doing this? What are
Who's
we?
starting? Reverend Tiffany?
What?
Sister Tip?
What am I doing?
Who's leading us in?
The
They
great
gonna.
honorable Bishop Evans.
Okay.
I didn't. Well, I'm
And
not.
we're talking about
And what are we going
mental.
to talk about? Okay.
Somebody introduce the topic.
All right. So who introduced it? Somebody did already?
Tiffany, can you introduce the topic?
Yeah, so today everyone is kind of going through something similar, right? We're all in this pandemic, and there are a lot of people just experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and we want to be a good platform to help people express what they're really feeling right now and give them maybe some tips and talk about the reality of what we're all experiencing.
Sure.
So we're coming together just with some ideas and some input to help people navigate through what is a very difficult time for many of us, but it doesn't have to be. So how can we maximize the moment? How can we work on our mental health? How can we stay strong? How can we catapult ourselves forward and continue to shift with the time that we're in? And so we're just going to start a little discussion, working through stress, working through fear, working through anxiety, uncertainty, faith, and we'll just go from there. Bishop Evans.
Okay. Oh,
I think
Have a
I
good
think
evening.
I think for me the greatest challenge for me and people that I talk to is just balancing faith and fear, because I think if we were to be honest, all of us, even if it was just for a short period, have had a feeling of anxiety or fear.
Yeah.
So I think the big
She froze.
I think the big question for a lot of people is, how do I balance? I'm saved. I'm a believer. I know
I
God's
think
got
you.
everything under
I think you
control. I
have to
know all
balance
of
it
that.
with common
But how do I
sense.
balance that?
Mhm. George, you want to take it? I think they're frozen.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, I guess what I'll say is, going off of that, I agree. I think it's also like the things that we feel in our own body, like
Mhm.
anxiety just shows up in our body, whether your heart is racing a bit or your breath is a little off. And it only takes a quick moment for you to start to think that, wait, do I have it? Do I have
Right.
the virus? And it
Mhm.
could just be your anxiety that's really kind of like going off the charts. And
Right.
balancing all of that can be really hard. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are trying to figure it out for themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's important to understand what anxiety is, because anxiety is something that we all experience. It's something that we need. A part of us needs something to teach us the difference between like fight or flight. So when we're in danger, it keeps us safe. Is a part of there's a good stress that keeps us moving when we're in danger. But then we kind of cross over and need to balance between that fear that keeps us safe to that fear that turns into panic and paranoia, and it becomes unrealistic. This unrealistic fear about the future and things that we can't control. And this is something that we're all kind of going to have to learn to balance. Is none of us have control over what we're experiencing right now. We don't know what's going to happen. All we can do is our best to stay safe. And that's just something that we're going to have to navigate. Whether it's finding ways to calm down, whether it's practicing mindfulness, which is just kind of living in the moment and where you are right now, and learning to balance and move forward from there. So whatever it is that works for people, whether it's getting out, getting some sun, getting some air, taking walks, relieving the pressure, doing things with family, anything that gives you a sense of calm and peace. We all have to find that so that we can continue to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think sometimes in the church we don't like to talk about things like this, like
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and depression, even though it's all over in the Bible, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Bishop has said this often that, that I think Saul was depressed and
Mm-hmm.
like there's lots of people that when we really read the Bible carefully,
Yeah.
we can see that some of their own mental health struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So if the thing that we use to guide our faith shows examples of mental health struggles, that means that we're going to have it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have a pandemic, it's kind of normal that you are going to feel overwhelmed and stressed
Absolutely.
and anxious and even
Sure.
depressed with all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Bishop, you
I
were talking
think
about
I
that a
think part of the problem is that some Christians, believers, have been kind of convinced that these feelings are not normal if you have faith.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
When in actuality, I believe that wisdom dictates and faith dictates that you be real about what's going on around you,
Mm-hmm.
and that you kind of acknowledge what's real,
Mm-hmm.
but you dwell with another power, another reality.
Mm-hmm.
That is the struggle I think that a lot of Christians are facing right now. They don't know how to balance their reality, their spiritual reality, with their natural reality.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, we start to search for usually answers that are not wise, and we start leaning to our fears. And fear is only faith in the wrong thing.
Right.
Mhm.
And when we understand that, we can purposely shift it away.
Mm-hmm. So we did have a question about how people are dealing with their relationships right now. What if you're stuck in the house with somebody you don't like?
Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and and how do you kind of deal with your own like impulse control issues or your anger and your stress when you don't have the support that you need at home? Like what can we say to people that are really struggling right now with their relationships?
Do you think that handling the impulses is maybe first in line, or acknowledging now that you are kind of confined, that there are some fractures in the relationship that are not dealt with because of everyday busyness? Do you think that admission has to come first before you can attack an impulse attached to the fact that maybe you really don't like each other?
you know, I think that is probably a part of it. I mean, one of the things, Bishop, you've shared with me and others is what pressure will do to folks,
Hmm.
and how pressure will expose some things that are already there. And when you're confined with somebody for a number of months and weeks, there's some pressure there, and I think that it lets some things come out that people should have been dealing with before, and it only makes it
Absolutely. Yeah.
more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
I think wise people will it'll kind of give you a to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
Do we communicate well? Do we listen well? Are we responding or reacting? I think those things should inspire people that are wise, to search the wisdom of the word, which is why God gives us those wisdom books, that the Job, Psalm, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He gives us that to give us wisdom in our present context that we can apply. So once you identify the fact, okay, we're not as strong as we thought we were, we don't communicate as well as we thought we did, we certainly don't conflict resolve as well as we thought we did, and somewhere along the line, I went from loving you and liking you to loving you and not liking you too much. I think those are the areas I believe that we should be inspired to try to retrieve. And sometimes it's just been lost in the flurry of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine that it's difficult to learn conflict resolution while you're in a conflict, though.
Mhm. But I think we do really well. Most of us do really well when we're forced into a situation.
Mhm.
And what this confinement has done, I saw a commercial I've been watching it for the last 2 weeks, and I think it's funny. It's very subtle humor, but the guy says, I'm getting to know my children.
Mhm.
And then he hesitates and says, there's three of them. Like he didn't know.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
thought that was so revealing
Mhm.
of how you can be unaware of your immediate circumstances
Mm-hmm.
just in the flurry of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and therefore lose contact with those emotions maybe that are very critical to relationship success, if that makes sense.
It does. And, I think something that I've been watching the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and reliving like my early days of like loving basketball.
Okay.
And there was a moment where they talked about how all they ever experienced with Jordan was just anger, and until
Really?
he won the first championship, and he starts crying, and the teammates go, "I've never seen this guy cry or share any other emotion." And I think there's something about when things slow down that we release, and sometimes it's not always positive things.
Yeah.
And I think this time, this quarantine, this kind of like stay at home is forcing people to express and release some things that they've been stuffing for a long time,
Right.
and it's causing conflict. But hopefully, I think that some people can resolve it if they allow themselves to.
Because there's nowhere to run.
I think it causes you to be more self-aware
Oh
also.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I agree.
Do you think that um, the issues, the negative dominating emotions that many people have cannot be hidden during a period of confinement like this? This is not just home for the weekend. I mean, it's been what, 2 months now?
Yep.
And with a forced lifestyle change and the shades of activity that we use to cover things have been lifted. I mean, everybody's really naked in front of one another now, and emotions are naked, and inability to really communicate. And I think what happens with a lot of long-term couples relationships is now you're shifting from discussing the business of the day and find out that there are some other things you need to discuss.
I agree. I think that a lot of us, and Bishop, is something that you taught us in premarital counseling too, is that everything in a marriage, especially, is magnified once you get married. So there's, it just magnifies everything. You can't hide from it. And this is one of those situations where problems that exist prior to the pandemic are only just going to be magnified.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to like navigate it and figure out what we can do to better communicate with one another and use it as an opportunity instead of, I think perception is everything. So if you look at it as a way to sabotage and isolate and within your own home, instead of working on communication, then it's going to make things more difficult for you. But if you use it as an opportunity to talk with your partner or your children or your family members about some things that are going on, then it can create some dialogue that is much needed in this type of situation, so that coming out of it, you can better better handle situations of pressure and stress with family.
Do any of you think that this period is revealing a level of unpreparedness to communicate effectively, like anything we've ever seen in the past?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about some people that I'm working with, and I think that actually the conflict is still a cover up, right? The arguments is just another way that I think people are trying to escape from the real conversation.
Yeah.
That you hurt me 5 years ago, and I still really haven't gotten over that. But I want to get in an argument with you now that we're confined. But what I really need to tell you is that I'm still hurt, and I think that there's a lot of truth, or people can dig deeper and be honest with each other. But I think a lot of people are just afraid. And now they don't have anywhere to run, and they don't know what to do. So they're just going to argue or not talk to each other.
Yeah. There's a question on the line, I think.
How do you deal with your emotions?
How to deal with your emotions. Go ahead, guys.
Well, I would first say just first acknowledge what it is, just acknowledge what it is. And this is not the time to be in denial. It's a really good time to be self-aware and figure out where you are. I think these seasons reveal a lot to us about how we handle uncertainty, how we handle doubt, how we handle fear. And so just exploring yourself, what am I struggling with right now? For me, personally, I know it's just a lot of doubt, and it's something that I've always struggled with. So as soon as I hit conflict, I doubt. you know.
Okay.
And so it was an opportunity for me to work on my faith. So now I have to study faith, and I have to learn to pray more and spend more time with God, because instead of sabotaging like a lot of us would do, no, now you have to get to work on some of those things that tend to get in the way of you making progress.
And do you think the average person is equipped enough to handle their emotions without help?
I don't think so. I think you need some type of help or intervention in some way. I mean, I think that Bishop's messages have had mental health and psychological stuff in
Oh,
it
yeah.
from day one.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mhm.
I think from books that we read, I think from other, so you don't necessarily need to go counseling or therapy, although I would encourage that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I think you do need some support or intervention. And
Mhm.
I'd also just say also, like I saw that the question was brought up by a gentleman, and I just also want to say that for guys, we also struggle with like complex or multiple emotions. We know it's there, but sometimes we just haven't given ourselves access or permission to say it's okay to be confused or not know what the next move is, or to be
Right.
overwhelmed, or to be nervous, or like I need to cry right now, or I need a
Mhm.
hug right now. It's
Mhm.
okay to express all of that.
Mhm.
I think for us guys, no one ever taught us that confusion is actually a sign that you're finally seeing all sides of a problem,
Mm.
and that confusion can be the beginning of unraveling emotions or whatever else you're having a problem with. But also, I think about the fact that God gave us these emotions not to control us.
Right.
And we can become intentional about taking control or being better stewards of something that God has created to serve us. And but our emotions have kind of been out of order for a while. They actually think they're running the show.
Mhm.
Uh, they remind me of the donkey carrying Jesus into Jerusalem. They thought the praise was thought the praise was for him. So they're out of order. So we need
Right.
to learn how to kind of that we can actually bring this thing back in control with the help of the Holy Ghost. And I think a big part of the problem is we were not created to see ourselves clearly without assistance.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, we our creation allows us to see all around us and evaluate everything.
Mhm.
Mhm.
The blind spot in the room is us.
Mhm.
And because we're the blind spot, we need something to help us see ourselves.
Mhm.
And in the faith, it's the Word of God, the Holy Spirit, uh, wise counsel,
Mhm.
therapy at times, but we need some assistance at some point in seeing ourselves because we're not created to see ourselves clearly.
And I think for me, once I acknowledge my emotions and then vent them to somebody I trust, I feel a whole lot better just in doing that.
Mhm.
Just to know that I'm not crazy, that the feelings that I'm having are valid because they're mine,
Mhm.
and that other people have the same feelings. So that
Mhm.
always helps me when I talk it out with somebody that I can trust.
Or
Mhm.
at least somebody who understands from a context of experience what you are feeling now that they may have felt in their own past.
Right.
So it
Right.
brings a relevance to it, and it does. It helps you feel like you're not losing your mind.
But
Right.
I think the challenge is, and I don't know about anybody else here, but I think the challenge is growing up in our culture, um, you weren't asked a lot about how do you feel or
Right.
what are you feeling. So I
Mhm.
think we grew up just kind of like pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down, and then you're in the grocery store and something happens and you go off because you've been all these emotions. So
Yeah.
I think just as a culture, we haven't been taught and encouraged to share our feelings.
Or they.
I think
So I think it's difficult for the average adult to do that.
Mhm.
I think us guys, I'm not George. You can help me with this. I'm not sure I absorbed the mindset because no one actually sat down and taught me this of not even acknowledging you had feelings.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You know, it wasn't about identifying them and keeping them pressed down. We weren't even told we had them, you know, because you couldn't be a man and have those kinds of feelings. So when you start having them, you suppress them
Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
don't appear to be masculine
Mhm.
when they're merely human.
Yeah,
Right. Because
I agree.
look at how little boys, as a little boy, your parent or caregiver will tell you, little boys don't cry. And
Mhm.
then you grow up thinking, and then you get in a relationship and it's like, well, what's going on? And
Mhm.
Hmm.
you don't know how to express your feelings because
Yeah.
you're always told, you know, you don't feel.
Mhm.
It's definitely, that it's okay to express anger as a guy growing up. Like you could hit, punch, whatever you want, but don't feel all the other hundreds of emotions that you could possibly
Yeah.
feel.
Mhm.
The other thing
It-
is that I think growing up in the church for me, it was that you should be happy all the time.
Right.
And that like to be Christian means you have a smile on your face,
uh,
right?
one
And
of the
that
top
like
10, 12 church lies.
Yeah.
right. And so when you're on your own, it's a struggle when
Mhm.
you're not happy or when you're upset or overwhelmed and you don't know what to do with all those emotions.
Mhm.
And then like, am I not being like Jesus? Am I not being
Mhm.
brave enough? And
Mhm.
it becomes a struggle. And no, you're just being human.
Yeah.
Right.
I think most people don't understand. There's an entire book dedicated to complaining called Lamentations.
Mhm.
Mhm.
You just get to go off, So,
Right.
Mhm.
so that
And you're still saved.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. The Bible doesn't come close to teaching that you're going to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
Not with Jeremiah being depressed,
Mhm.
Elijah being ruled by fear,
Mhm.
Moses' insecurity, Jesus got angry, Paul almost sounded like he had a split personality or at least dyslexic. If you look at his writing, so there's some issues there that
Mhm.
are very real, but I believe God presents them so we can know, you're not crazy. You
Mhm.
just have some challenges
Mhm.
that can be overcome
Mhm.
Right.
in your relationship with God.
Mhm. I'm so glad you
And
said that because it seems like there's so many people that they are using scriptures kind of to hide
Mhm.
what they
yeah.
really feel, and it seems
Mhm.
like they are afraid to express that they're anxious or depressed because I'm
Mhm.
not supposed to feel like that. The joy of the Lord is my strength, and they say it with not like it's like they really mean it or have it has become incarnate, but it's just what they're supposed to say. And instead of reaching out for help or being able to express, it's like somebody has given them their feelings, told them what to feel. Like you're not allowed to be upset or depressed.
Right.
Just
Right.
be joyful, because that's what you're supposed to do. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
everybody, when you're not, what do? Especially those that are struggling with loneliness right now and don't have support and don't have anyone to reach out to. They need to know that their feelings are valid and they have an outlet for it.
Yeah. There's a question on here. How do you deal with a person that is a master emotional hider?
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
I
Go
feel
ahead,
like
George.
I feel like that should be like in one of those DSM books that we study.
Yeah.
But
Emotional hider.
I think it goes back to some of the stuff that we're saying. First, you have to be able to recognize that you do have emotions. Because
Mhm.
some people who are hiding don't even recognize
Mhm.
that there are emotions that's there for them to express.
Mhm.
But then the other part is that it's really scary. It's really scary that because we think that we are in control, and as mentioned before, a lot of times we're not. And I think we think that we can control our emotions rather than just letting them be and letting them out. And I
Mhm.
Mhm.
think that if people were okay with, like, you might be sad or you might cry or you might be nervous, you might be any of these things, and that's okay, we
Mhm.
might be more willing to show those emotions.
Yeah.
I've kind of discovered a pattern in these years I've been counseling people. And I find a lot of people that hide their emotions are not good communicators.
Right.
Mhm.
And after a period of time of miscommunicating how they were feeling, and sometimes adding to their anxiety rather than relieving it, they
Mhm.
shut down more and more over a period of time
Mhm.
because they don't express themselves well.
Mhm.
And something that I've found, and maybe you guys can talk to me about this. Some things that you think sound absolutely rational while you're thinking.
Mhm.
They don't unravel until you open your mouth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They make perfect sense to you as long as they're in your head,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they sound absolutely foolish, petty, immature when
Mhm.
you begin to speak about them.
Yeah.
And I think that vulnerability causes people to be a little more hesitant to
Mhm.
Mhm.
reveal an emotion.
Mhm.
So, the way I think you deal with an emotional person that hides them, you have to ask them the right questions.
Right.
It becomes a, what do you think?
Mhm.
Have you ever thought of this?
Mhm.
How do you feel about X, Y, and Z?
Mhm.
I think those questions can bring a person out more so than the grilling that a lot of us have mastered.
Mhm.
But it
That's
takes more
funny.
time to do that. I
Yeah.
think I think patience goes along with that kind of communication.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, in my own experience with clients, there's always a reason, why they're
Mhm.
hiding,
Mhm.
and usually it's something in their history that has caused them to feel like they can't communicate.
Mhm.
So sometimes, and part of asking the questions is asking them simply, when did you start to hide? What do you remember in your history caused you to kind of go into the sunken place and not want to come out and share? And who told you that it wasn't okay to share? Or what did you experience? And then once they start to recognize kind of what set them in that direction, it's
Mhm.
a stepping stone to get them to start opening up and communicating.
Have you all found that this type of hiding is usually connected to an event?
Usually, I believe sometimes. Yeah, sometimes.
And is it a
Yeah.
lack of trust in the person that's asking you to communicate?
Well, I think that general mistrust has been built over time,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
so you have a hard time. That's another way. The way you ask the questions
Mm-hmm.
can cause them to open the door
Yep.
rather than feel like they're being attacked and have to
Mm-hmm.
really bar the door even further.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in a session yesterday with someone to the point of, is it an event? I agree, and I think it's actually multiple events. I think
Hmm.
it's one significant event, and then
Hmm.
everything else is to confirm what the story that we've created in our mind,
Mm-hmm.
that I can't trust people, or I can't open up, or that someone's going to betray me,
Mm-hmm.
and then we actually almost put people in situations where they do that to us.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It's really hard now to move back and try something else.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
What I found is I used to think it had to be what I call a Genesis event,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's a revelation event. What I mean, not just basically at the beginning of life, but at the end of life. When it comes at the end of life or at a point in life, it's because there have been a succession of events, and this one more thing happens
Mm-hmm.
that makes almost stops the progress of the person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And they decide, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm not
Right.
going to do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But we often think it's something that happens in childhood
Mm-hmm.
that causes it. But the big event is the one that shuts everything down at
Right.
the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we have to go from that to helping the person change the narrative, like George just
Mhm.
said, changing the way the story is written. And that's something that we have control over. Like Bishop, you always teach us that, our mind is in our control. We can
Mhm.
we can control our thoughts. And so that's one of the things that people have to understand is that your mind does not control you, you control it. And
Mhm.
so you have the power to change the narrative by what you say and how you communicate. So rebuilding trust, opening up, talking, sharing are all ways and steps that somebody can take to start that healing process so they don't stay
Mhm.
stuck in that pattern of just hiding and stuffing and feelings.
Do you think that part of the problem is courage to talk to someone who will not affirm your hurt
Mm,
in the sense
Mm.
of in the sense of uh, telling you things that will validate you being hurt and say it's okay?
mhm,
You have to have the courage to say, okay, I need some help because I don't want to feel this way anymore.
mhm,
And that requires a season of vulnerability and you have to trust the individual. But I
mhm,
think it's more like surgery in the dark,
mhm,
Mm.
you
mhm,
know, and
Mm.
you have to feel your way around in the conversation
mhm,
because the person, has these sensitivities that you don't want to exaggerate.
mhm, mhm. And it's something that you guys taught us, right? That deliverance is not an event, it's a process.
That's
And
right.
so you have to overcome that fear every day to open up so you don't
Mhm.
go back into that same pattern of being comfortable in isolation or being
Yeah.
comfortable in pain. And unless we continue to let the process run its course, we'll always stay stuck. It's a fear that we have to overcome every day, you know?
Do you think maybe part of the problem is a lot of people don't volunteer to be helped?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think a lot of people are repeating the story or the events in their own minds. Some people think they're strong enough. Some people think they're wise enough. But there's something different about being able to talk to somebody, have a conversation with someone that can give you a different perspective.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Like Bishop, I've walked away from multiple conversations with you.
Oh yeah.
Like
Oh
I just
yeah.
did not think about it that way. You didn't have to say it like that. You didn't have to say it like that.
Same,
But there's
same.
just a different perspective, and that being able to have that allows you now to maybe change some of the details of the story that you've
Absolutely.
created in your head just
Mhm.
because you had a different perspective.
So, but
Because
what do you?
I
What
always agree with me.
Right.
And the only
I w
person that I think is smarter than me is me.
and that's what I was gonna say. What do you do when people don't want to consider other perspectives?
But you just it's so easy to get trapped in your own head
Mhm.
and start to amen your own sermon.
Right.
Mhm.
It's so easy to do that because when you're in the company of one, you can create an environment that your brain will accommodate itself to,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then you just search for people who don't challenge that state of mind.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I'm back to the fact that if I realize I have a problem, it does take courage to walk up to someone,
Mhm.
uh, and it takes time to find someone you can trust, and then it still takes courage to say, "Look, I need you to look at this bad part of me,
Mhm.
and hopefully you'll still respect me after I tell you."
Mhm.
Mhm.
That I preface a lot of meetings with, "You can't tell me anything that's going to make me run out the room. You
Mhm.
cannot tell me anything that's going to embarrass you. You will not change. If anybody changes, it's going to be you.
Mhm.
I will not stop loving you after you tell me this." And
Right.
that has historically just brought the curtain down. Just said, okay, I can talk to this person.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure counselors show enough vulnerability
Mhm.
to make people open to hearing their voices.
Yeah.
It's definitely not the way that it's often taught. I
Mhm.
think that as people become more confident, or as I become more confident in who I am and how I want to relate to people, I know that I give more of myself. And
Mhm.
Mhm.
whether that's, I know I'm bringing hope, or whether that's I'm believing that I can show that I believe in them, or even that what you just mentioned, that no matter what you say or do, I'm still going to be here. You can't get rid of me.
Yeah.
You came in and you're stuck with me. And so we just got to do this together.
I
Yeah.
think it makes the person relatable.
Right.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one thing that you can't learn in school. That I've met a ton of counselors that we've been in trainings together. But one thing you can't teach is empathy.
Right.
It's something that no matter what tools you have in your toolbox or whatever as a counselor, you can't teach compassion and empathy. And there's some counselors who sit with a notepad and they're taking notes, but they lack the empathy. And no matter what you do, someone sitting across from you who's sharing deep details about their lives and you have no feedback or you're not showing compassion, they're of course not. Of course they're not going to open up and get anything out of it.
Tiff, do you think that in that scenario that the counselor has mistakenly thrown their experiences away rather than loaded them into their relational toolbox?
Yeah, I agree with George. I think part of it is the way we're taught in school. But once you grow as a counselor, you have to be vulnerable. It's a reason why a lot of programs want you to get your own therapy so that you can reach that place of being vulnerable or open up to someone yourself so you know what it's like to sit on the other side with
Mhm.
as a client, because until you know what that feels like to share something and not know the person sitting in front of you and not knowing that
Sure,
if you can trust
sure.
them, that you have no idea what.
And to that point also is that, you know, a lot of us who are trying to help people are also still struggling with our own stuff.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And the more that, one of the reasons why it's taught a certain way is that the more people share, is that they can now start to take over the session that is supposed to be for somebody else and make it about them, about themselves.
Right.
And so it takes a lot of maturity and wisdom and experience talking to other people where you can realize I can share this part about me and I'm not changing that I'm helping you, right?
Right.
Versus like turning it all about me.
Right. Kind of like a relatable story that adds to the conversation rather than redirecting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that can be hard to do sometimes because I don't know about you, but there are times when my sensitivity does not come with me at 100% in a conversation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes you can be the person you're going to help is just slightly more emotional than you are that day. It's weird how it happens. Yet, I think with the help of the Spirit of God, if you ask for that help, especially when you're there to help someone else, I think He'll assist you.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that for me, it's also been recognizing that it is part of the gifting that God has given me,
Mhm.
and knowing when I'm in the zone,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also knowing when I'm not, and knowing that there could be so many other things that's going on in my own life, which goes back to just being honest with my own emotions and my own feelings, that some of those other things can sometimes take me out, but because I'm gifted, I can appear that I'm in the zone, but I'm not. And
Well,
so I
and
have to go check
ma-
myself.
maturity, maturity with the gift is when you get to the point when you're completely out of your zone and the person you're helping can't tell it.
Mm,
You know,
mhm.
you're still helping, the words are there, but it's kind of being present and absent at the same time.
So the person you're talking to doesn't know.
No, they don't know.
They can't feel that you're not on your game.
Well, and I think just I'll use me as an example. I think that there were times when I first started preaching that everyone could tell when I was off my game.
Mhm.
And now, rarely does anybody know that I'm off it.
Mhm.
Because in times when we're not feeling 100%, our experience kicks in. In the faith context, our anointing kicks in and our gifting kicks in, and it compensates. It's like a Samson thing. It compensates for what you're lacking.
Mhm. Mhm. That's good.
Yeah.
So you
So
think
go ahead.
good. So do you think the average person would benefit from counseling, even if just in general?
I think that everybody can. I think most people can. If my experience is any indicator of the need for it,
Mm,
I think it's tremendous.
mhm.
To have single-handedly counseled maybe 44, 45,000 people in the last 30 years, that to me indicates that a whole lot of people need some conversation and they need direction and some real help.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that I haven't gotten there yet, Bishop. I mean, I'm just on 17 years. Yeah, I got a few thousand hours on me, but I think that what I've realized, for even for me personally,
Mhm.
having advisors, guides, mentors, people that I can go to has
Mhm.
been crucial for my own personal and
Oh,
professional
absolutely.
development.
Absolutely.
And that without allowing myself to be vulnerable in front of others, I would make some really bad choices in my life,
Mhm.
right? Or not recover from some things that have been tough and hurtful. So
Absolutely.
I see that how people come to me for some of those very same things,
Mhm.
that sometimes they just want somebody that can advise them, or listen to them, or guide them, or they can open up to, and that is okay. That if
Yeah.
it's okay to go to somebody to share and to learn and grow from.
Mhm.
Do you think, George, that your own experiences have given you the sensitivity to help other people navigate their own issue?
Yeah. Well, example I've shared before is that I didn't grow up with pets.
Okay.
I mean, in Jamaica, my dad would have some pets, but they weren't pets. They were like outside. It was a dog that was outside. It wasn't a pet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the first time a client told me that they lost their dog and they were crying, internally,
Mhm.
I'm like, "What's wrong with you? It's a dog.
Yeah.
Get
Yeah.
over it." But
Yeah.
the more I did it, the more I had conversations, the more I learned. I recognized what that pet wasn't just like a pet; it was a family member, and the
Yeah.
loss and the grief was
Yeah.
very similar.
It
And
Mhm.
so,
wasn't the dog in the backyard on the chain.
no, it wasn't. Right, not at all. And so
No.
I learned that through experience and personal conversation, that it allowed me to have more empathy and more
Mhm.
connection. And that's happened in lots of ways. Things
Mhm.
that I never experienced in my own life, that
Mhm.
now I can connect with people because I've heard
Mhm.
it multiple times.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think we can gain sensitivities in areas that we may have not even had exposure.
Mhm.
Because I believe the Lord gives us that sensitivity, but it has to be developed. I don't think you get it overnight. It's not done in a sterile place.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So when you guys, there's another one. How do you express boundaries to people who like sharing their problems with you all the time? Oh man. Oh man.
Oh,
Welcome to a
Lord.
counselor's life.
Right?
Oh, God.
And
Conversation
this is
number
where the gift
22.
goes bad. Like, I don't know about you all, but there's a way I could just be in a random place and
Right.
want to share.
It never fails.
They just know, like, you
They
must be
sense
somebody.
it.
They smell it. They
Uh-huh.
just know you're a counselor.
Yeah, people want a meeting with you without scheduling one. Yeah, yeah. Well, how do you set the boundaries? What do you think you have to do?
I think it depends on the situation. Like it really does. If someone is sharing, if they're oversharing and sharing things that you really can't help with, for
Mm,
example, like domestic violence, and it's something that, or abuse or things, of that nature, or maybe they're suicidal, then I think that those are times when you really want to encourage the person to talk to a counselor or talk to you, Bishop.
mhm,
I've done that a lot.
yeah,
Let me give you Bishop's number.
Yeah, let me give you Bishop's number real quick. Know your limits, and then be honest. Say what you can say, and then turn it over when you can't.
yeah. I think if I'm hearing the person correctly, um, there are some people in our lives, I know in my own life, that always wanted to share their problems with me.
Mhm.
This was before I was pastor, but they never had time to hear mine.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
And they kind of felt like I was a good place to dump,
Mhm.
Hmm.
but they never would receive anything from me. So they never were a help. So, you have to learn some survival techniques.
Mhm.
And that is a person like that is indicating to you, I think, and you guys correct me, what their true perception of you is in
Right.
their life.
Hmm.
And you have to make a decision to guard yourself from that person after a while.
Mhm.
And that feels selfish because of the way we've been raised in the faith.
Yeah.
But self preservation is not selfish.
Yeah, one of the things for me I put people in three categories. There are people that I know when I see a text or a phone call from them, I know they want something. I just
Mhm.
Hmm.
Those are the
Mhm.
people that are the takers in my life, and I try to
Mhm.
limit that. But I
Mhm.
know that who I am is that I'm going to offer things, and I have things to give to people. So
Hmm.
there's gonna be some of those people, and
Can't
Mhm.
then
help it.
right, and then there's going to
Mhm.
be people who are my peers. Right, there's a give and take. There's a back and forth.
Mhm.
Then there's the people who are my advisors, guides, mentors.
Mhm.
Those are the people where I'm the taker, right?
Yeah.
I receive so much
Yeah.
more from them. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Putting you on blast.
Can we take his square out? Right. But
You
it
weren't
balances
alone in
out.
that, George. I was looking at all three
I
people.
know we get it.
It balances out, and I think that. But the boundary is that I realize I can't have all takers in my life.
No,
Mhm.
nobody can.
That's
Mhm.
just too much.
It's
Mhm.
not realistic.
And
Yeah.
I think when you're in a position of expectation, like the three of you are, there's this entitlement to your time
Hmm.
Mhm.
and your knowledge and experience that people develop,
Mhm.
especially those who want to have you clock in whenever they're around you.
Hmm.
Mhm.
They don't respect the fact that it's Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm.
and you're not working.
Mhm.
So they decide that your free time
Mhm.
is their time.
Mhm.
So and it's always, do you have 5 minutes?
Mhm.
And it's never 5 minutes.
No.
Mhm.
No, no.
I think it's
So,
important to learn boundaries by learning to say no. I
Mhm.
find that in counseling, that my clients that really, really have a struggle with saying no, really struggle with codependency. Also, they try to be everyone's savior, and it's important that you recognize that Jesus died trying to save people. Right? And so you're not Jesus, and if people are taking and taking from you, it's going to crush you. We're not meant to carry the weight of the world.
mhm.
So, it's important that we set boundaries by learning to simply just say no. Don't pick up the phone. Like everyone's saying, create boundaries with your time so people know how to treat you.
Now, somebody watching this tonight probably has a problem saying no.
Hmm.
Hmm. A lot of people do.
Yeah. And I've been telling people for as long as I can remember, in some situations, you don't have to say the change, you do the change.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, you just start being unavailable for that individual because their pattern is consistent. You have to admire their consistency. Every time you see their name or their text, they want
Mhm.
something.
Mhm.
So you can begin to be unavailable and guard your own time. Um, because I think that when you try to tell a person, I don't want to deal with you, I think you raise a lot of conflict.
Right.
Yes.
But if
Yeah.
you do the change and they finally open the conversation, you used to talk to me a lot and you don't talk to me as much as you used to, then you can have the conversation without causing a storm.
Right.
But most of us are not patient enough to wait for that time to happen.
So how do you have that conversation with people that, like we said earlier, come to you to talk about the same thing over and over again? How do you draw that boundary with that?
Well, I think that what I do is every conversation I have, I try to instigate a progression. And if I see that there's no progression and the person just wants to talk about what's bothering them, then I will challenge that.
Okay.
I'm not sure now why you're coming to me. And they'll invariably say, why? Because they think they're having a good time.
Mhm.
We're not making any progress. Do you realize you've just reshaped the same thing every time we've come
Right.
together? So
Right.
tell me what you want to accomplish out of this because I'm not sure I understand what you want to do.
So
Right.
then is that to say some people really don't want resolution?
They give you that impression.
Mm.
They give you that. Some people just want to be heard.
Right.
They can walk away from you and kind of imply that you said they were okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there are a lot of people that want to be heard. And, I've made space in my life where that's part of what I offer for some people.
Mhm.
I'm here to hear, I'm here to listen to you. You're not really necessarily looking for a life change. You're not really looking for something significant to happen. You just
Mhm.
want somebody to listen to you because
Yeah,
maybe you've never had that. And
yeah.
then, of course, I'm eventually going to say something to help push them or encourage them along. But sometimes people just need a space that they can be heard. That's okay.
And that space, George, do you find that space builds enough trust for you to conversationally grab them in the collar?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, sometimes,
That was a good way to put it.
yeah, sometimes you can grab a person in their emotional collar, but only after they have had plenty of time to create a safe place called you.
Oh, definitely. I think that's a big part of it. And like there's some people who would just punch you in the face, and I'm more like I'll tap you on the shoulder, and then when you look around, you get punched in the face. So you don't really see it coming. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
right, and
You're like a George Foreman. I'm more like a Muhammad Ali. I accumulate blows and then I get you.
Yeah,
right.
you do.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But boundaries are difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Felipe Marcos has a question. What do you say about people who constantly make reckless decisions, wow,
Mm.
during this pandemic crisis that is turning away from God or anything spiritual?
Wow.
Mm. Anybody?
I think this is another. It makes me think about some conversations I've had with people. I think this is another time where things that people are already struggling with spiritually,
Mhm.
that the pandemic is making them blame it on the pandemic, but they've already been wrestling with God or
Right.
unsure or struggling with their faith. And here's the reason now I can, jump off ship when it's
Right.
really I'm confused, I'm unsure, and I maybe need some godly counsel, or I maybe need some support, or I need to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know what God wants me to do right now. And that's hard for some people, especially in the church, where sometimes we feel we need to know every step, or we need
Mhm.
to be listening or hearing God all the time. When sometimes you could just be off.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that I've found is that some people spiritually come into a relationship with God looking for an exit ramp
Right.
and looking for something to be offended by in their faith. And I think Mark chapter 4 in the sower, parable of sower, talks about someone who gets offended by the word or offended by the process of God. And I find there are a lot of people that are waiting to be offended because they want to step away. Some people live their lives looking for a way out of everything.
Mhm.
They live offended.
Yeah.
Um, and that offense gives them an automatic way out of almost everything serious,
Mhm.
especially if the thing requires some commitment from them.
Mhm.
Yes.
Then I have this onboard thorn that I aggravate myself
Mhm.
so that I can get out of whatever I want to get into,
Mhm.
if that makes sense to you all.
That makes
Mhm.
sense.
Mhm.
That was a good question.
Very good
Yeah, it
question.
was.
But I think this confinement is also revealing some vulnerabilities in our faith,
Yeah.
which means vulnerabilities in our relationship with God.
Mhm.
And I'm finding that I'm having more questions with Christians who are having trouble with fear than I've ever seen before
Mhm.
in my years of pastoring, and it's a matter of being imbalanced, and the imbalance is being created during this time because we are not. A lot of people are not concentrating on their spiritual relationship with God.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
The news has become their gospel,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
and they're watching it to a point where has disturbed their spirit.
Mhm.
And now they're struggling with their faith because they're not praying much, they're not reading much, they're not worshiping much, but they are listening to news, breaking news
Mhm.
every hour on the hour.
And it's the
Mhm.
same news.
Of course,
It's the same news.
I don't know why they just don't say, "Here comes the news you didn't see in the last hour if you were watching." They
Right.
don't want you to turn away, so they say breaking news at the top of every hour.
Right.
Mhm.
And they
Mhm.
say a
And
lot of people,
you think something new's coming, and
it's the
end
same
up watching
thing.
Same
for another
news.
hour. And then they look
Mhm.
again, breaking news again, and it's such a hustle.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Which
Mhm.
also goes to like how we could be, and I'm gonna use this word, we can be addicted to our own struggle, right? We
Yeah.
can
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
we can feed into our own anxiety. We say we don't want to be anxious, but yet
Mhm.
we do all these things to keep us anxious.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah,
We say we don't want to be depressed, but we do these things that make us stay in that.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
And so it's hard to make that shift or change, but it goes
Mhm.
back to, I think, some of the things that we've said is that sometimes that's where being vulnerable or open or finding someone you can talk to or doing
Mhm.
something different can really be helpful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible is real. Go ahead, Val.
Sometimes I think that can be a blind spot
Mhm.
that you
Mm.
don't realize it's just the same thing over and over again.
Mhm.
But the Bible's pretty clear. You can control that. And
Mhm.
one of the greatest revelations I ever had in the Word was in the text when it says, "Think on these things."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Intentionally
Mm-hmm.
think on the right stuff to
Mm-hmm.
combat the stuff
Mhm.
that
Mm-hmm.
you are allowing to get into your head.
Mhm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when I saw that, the intentionality, it kind of delivered me amazingly.
Mhm. Yeah.
That I have to take control of it and think purposely on the things that are going to dig me out of the place I've placed myself, out of that dilemma that I'm in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my mindset is is the first order of business.
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
you have to be positive on purpose.
Yeah,
Hmm.
positive on purpose. And
Hmm.
that's hard to do. I just had a
It
conversation
is.
with somebody yesterday who said, it just seems like being depressed is, I find comfort in that. And I said, really? And she said, yes, I just seems like it's just a comfortable place to be. And I don't know why I'm doing it to myself.
Mm.
And I told her, I don't know if it's comfort as much as it is easy. Because, being depressed is easy. It's almost like jumping off of a diving board. You go straight down. But to get back up, you have to kick your feet. You got to get up. You got
You
to
got to
move your
work.
arms. You got to do some work. You
You
got
got
to
to
use your
work.
energy. And I
Mm-hmm.
think some people get positivity fatigue. They
Right.
just get tired of
Hmm.
being positive because it takes work. It takes work to have a structure, to get up in the morning, to wash yourself, to get dressed, to journal, to call your counselor. And some people just don't feel like it. So I think it's easy sometimes to let yourself get in the bed, put the blankets over yourself, watch the news and wallow.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
because it's
Mm-hmm.
easier to do that than it is to take the effort that it takes to not be depressed.
Mm-hmm. And then if you
Is it?
surround yourself with negative people, then that's
Makes it
feeding you
worse.
even more. It makes
Mhm.
it 10 times worse.
Mhm.
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 I wonder if it's possible that depression could be a product of intelligence.
Mhm.
I think so.
Yeah.
Um, that you've got to really have some smarts
Mm-hmm.
to think yourself into a position
Mm-hmm.
that intellectually you know is not good for you,
Right.
yet find comfort in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like wrapping up in a blanket
Mm-hmm.
that you could take off at any time if you really had to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are steps to unraveling yourself,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
but I think that sometimes you can become overloaded with the struggle to stay balanced.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when I get depressed, it's when I'm doing nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to do nothing sometimes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
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 Very.
You know, and
I
maybe
think
that's the comfort zone. It pulls you out of the fray of your life,
Mm-hmm.
but
I,
it's eventually not productive. What were we saying,
Right.
George?
I think also that like your point is really good one. It's that we think too much or that we're too smart sometimes for our own good.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we make these comparisons with other people and other people's lives that might not even be realistic, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
might not be really something that we would enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a client earlier today that was wishing that they were living in a different state and that life would be better. And maybe it could be, but
Mm-hmm.
Not right
there
now.
might be other things that could be also
Yeah.
bad about living there. And so that
Mm-hmm.
comparison then gets you into this negative place and you create a whole new story
Right.
based off
Mhm.
of the thing that you're comparing.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have just take the blanket off and go somewhere else or
Mm-hmm.
try something else instead of going there.
Yeah.
I've found in my sessions that over the years that comparison is a major problem,
Mm-hmm.
and we compare ourselves to people whose journey and destiny we're not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
We're observing people and becoming depressed about a process they're going through, and not knowing what the end of their journey is going to be. So it's almost like you're just looking at people and deciding, I'm going to compare myself to that person, and it's
Mm-hmm.
always someone that's not doing what you're doing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the same destiny.
Oh, they
Mm-hmm.
have the same
Or
destiny,
been
not the
born
same.
20 years before you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I
something
was
else.
I was wondering what our thoughts because I've received a lot of people struggling around money and the financial stress and then also their faith. And so I wonder what are other people's thoughts around just the financial pressure that people are feeling during this time.
I, I I've found that there's been a ton of people that had bad stewardship
Mm-hmm.
uh, habits, especially Christians who want God to perform miracle after miracle as it relates to their finances, and they don't want to plan to
Mm-hmm.
do anything. And now the spending to soothe yourself lifestyle has become a major issue
Mm-hmm.
because you're going into this time. Most people did not expect to be laid off. Most people
Mm-hmm.
did not expect this struggle. And but I'm finding that people are not learning. You know what? When I come out of this, I need to do a better job at what God has given me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not sure that awakening is starting to happen yet.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
What about those that are really, really just out of work and try to be a good steward? And Bishop, what do you say to the one who's just stressed?
Well, I think that we fall back on our faith and the provisionary nature of God. At the same time, as I am waiting for God to move, I am searching for ways to create income.
Right.
You know, so it's not let's sit back and see if God performs a miracle. The miracle might be you discovering a way to get some revenue coming into your life, and God performs a miracle through that.
Mm-hmm.
But to sit back and wait,
Right.
um, you guys are in a generation that I didn't have. We didn't have online income sources.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to make money online. You know, but now, man, you can start a business overnight.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get fortunate and God puts his hand on it, you can start to do some great things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people get discouraged so they don't look
Mm-hmm.
because it feels like it's a wasted effort, but it's not.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question
I have
up
a
here.
question. Yep. How do we encourage one another not to use food, alcohol, anger, or other items as coping methods?
Well, I'm
Not to
failing.
use
I'm
food,
failing in the food
alcohol, anger,
category.
or other items as coping methods.
I didn't fall off the wagon. I jumped off the wagon during this.
Comfort food, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to know your triggers,
Absolutely.
Mhm.
know what's triggering you at the time.
Mhm.
And
I
then
also go ahead.
you eventually got to go back to work and getting them clothes. So that's motivation for me.
But I also find that that you can't live your entire life, I think, not rewarding yourself from time to time with things that you
Sure.
like.
Absolutely.
You're a very committed person, very consistent. That one slice of sweet potato pie is not going to kill you.
Right.
But you have to have the discipline to say, this is what I'm going to have, and I've had that for the week.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Like I like the apple fritters from the farmers market,
Oh,
Mhm.
Jesus.
but I don't allow myself more than one or two a month.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't have it. I can eat a half a bag of potato chips, but
Mhm.
I'm in a small bag,
Mhm.
and say that's enough and hold it for another. But most people, you have to have that discipline so you can reward yourself from time to time.
Yeah.
But there
Yeah.
are a lot of people that can't, and it really is stress eating or stress response
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to what's going on around us. And
Yeah.
once you recognize that, I think that's the first step to getting a grip on it.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's like paying attention to your emotions, right? So
Mhm.
when you go for that snack, can you ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Am I nervous? Or when you said you're only going to eat, that one cookie, and then you end up eating more,
Oh yeah,
something
oh
else
yeah.
going on for you, and it's hard. But if
Mhm.
you're able to somehow make that connection, you can realize that you're not eating because you're hungry,
Mhm.
Mm-mm.
right? You're eating because
Stress.
you're trying to deal with whatever is going on
Mhm.
within you or internally, or
Mhm.
you're bored, or you're not sure, or you're confused, and
Yeah.
you're substituting that for food.
Mhm.
And some of it is as simple as getting it out of your house.
Mhm.
Or not bringing it in.
Yeah,
That would be me.
because when you have one of those moods, you start checking expiration dates.
Mhm.
You start doing a sniff test.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotta know your triggers. Do you think people will be able to jump back into the rat race quickly after this is over?
Mm-mm.
No, I think it's going to be a
You
minute.
think not?
I don't think so.
I
I think
think
a
the
lot of
tear.
people have lost structure during this time. They're going to have to get back on
Mhm.
the train.
I think it's going to be force structure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think the tyranny of necessity is going to force a lot more speed than we would like to admit.
Yeah. Let's hope so.
Yeah, I think necessity can be a tyrant.
Mhm.
I've just also heard today, that there's some things that are going to start up faster than others, right? And
Yeah.
Mhm.
so the
Mhm.
restaurant business might be one of those things that might take a while, or going to the movies, right?
Mhm.
Or there's certain industries that it's going to take a while, so you're going to have to find ways to be creative and
Right.
thoughtful
Absolutely.
of how you
Mhm.
earn money. And then there are others where it's like, well, the game has changed. Some people might be working from home more or online.
Yep.
You might need
Yep.
to be flexible, and I think some people don't allow themselves the flexibility even
Mhm.
in their work environment,
Mhm.
and they're going to need that.
Mhm.
I hear in some places, some states, they are in the restaurant industry, they're toying with social distancing in their dining rooms,
Mhm.
Mhm.
I heard that today.
and that's going to be a slow way to reemerge for a restaurant when you have capacity for 100 people,
Mhm.
but you're only seating 25,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
and the utilities don't know you don't have
No.
100 people. They have no idea.
Mhm.
Sister Maya said we need to start wrapping it up, guys.
Okay.
Okay. She was waving. Okay. I didn't see it.
I felt her spirit.
Wrap it up.
Any final thoughts, Bishop?
Well, I think this is good. I think this is needed. I think there are people that are suffering in various ways and behaviors
Mm-hmm.
under the stress of this voluntary confinement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these kinds of conversations can help people in a very unthreatening way,
Mm-hmm.
either participate by listening or get the courage to put a question up so we can answer it. So I think all this stuff is very, very good.
And I think it's good that people know that we're all feeling the same way in varying degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just
Mhm.
encourage everyone to give themselves grace. You know, this is a time that we all kind of need to just sit back and figure some things out and rethink our lives. And so just give yourself some time to do that without putting the unnecessary pressure to always have it right. You know, this is a time of learning and reflecting, and let's just take advantage of the time we have to do that.
And stop judging every emotion, right?
One of the things, or two things that I've recognized, is that just being able to have conversations like this give people a place of saying, thank you. I can connect with you all, or this is what I've been experiencing. And two, for me and my family, we've been really trying to practice gratitude, because no matter what's wrong, there are multiple things that I'm so grateful for. I mean, my mother was working in the hospitals, and my life would have been so much different if this happened earlier.
Right.
Versus now, I'm at a place where I can still earn money for my
Sure.
family. So I'm grateful for so many things, even though it's very hard for so many people.
Right.
Pharaoh number 2 has already said that we're
Pharaoh
doing
Jr.
He didn't say, would you like to do a part 2? He said, we're doing.
Exclamation.
So, yeah, 3
Don't forget that.
Yeah, exclamation point. So Pharaoh has already assigned us additional work.
Part 2 this month.
Yeah.
It's been good though.
Yeah.
It's been good.
So glad to see you all too.
You too, Bishop Evans,
Same.
George.
Thank you all.
Good to
Stay
see you,
strong
Reverend
and stay
Tiffany.
safe.
Until we meet again.
Just everybody in the house, George, for me.
Right.
I will. I'll tell them that you said hi.
Virtual hugs for everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you.